2, 3, 4.
Hi everyone, this is Jewish Talk coming to you from Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHBC, also streaming on the iHeart and the iTunes app. This program is later archived on Spreaker.com. So hi there, my name is Rabbi Perl. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This all depends on when you are listening. Many people say that 2020 is a lost year. It's gone, fertig. From a national point of view, music, movies, culture, lots of things that are not taking place. And every commentator comes up with the same idea. 2010, 2020, forget about it, it's all lost. So let's take a look at it. What makes a year a lost year? Is it the hardships? The things that we cannot do? But everyone has hardships and things that they can't do. So it must be something else. There was just a study saying that millions of people who are now working from home and from their offices. In fact, the study notes that some of today's biggest and most modern companies, like Google, have told their employees that from now on, you can work from home regularly. And even after the coronavirus finishes, and let's hope and pray that it ends sooner than later. So, why are we allowing this? Because they found that employees are just as productive working from home as they are in the office. For starters, when you're at home, you're not commuting every day. It saves you time. Also, when you're at home, you don't have the distractions of the office, talking with the employees, hanging around the water cooler or the cafeteria, saying hello and goodbye as you come and go, and looking and checking your iPhone 45,000 times a day. When you're at home, there's none of that. Yes, when you're around people at the office, you can create a team and you can bounce ideas off other people. But in general, employee productivity at home is just as good. That's what they're finding. Even more interesting, they're also saying that employees who had children with them at home were more productive than people working at home by themselves. People working at home alone were 2% less productive than working at the office, while working at home alone with kids was 1% less productive than working in the office. Now you'd think that if you're by yourself, you'd have more time. But they're saying that having kids around added life and excitement to the atmosphere, unlike people by themselves who are likelier to get depressed working alone. No. So let's take a brief detour into the quarantine story in Jewish history. I want to share with you that we do find many great leaders in our history who went into either forced or self-quarantine. And I was just learning today on reading the book of Psalms. We read in 142, Psalm 142, we read about a special prayer, special psalm written by King David while he was inside the cave. He was quarantined. He was forced to stay in that cave because King Saul was out to get him. And we read that even though he was under pressure, he was able to have the sense of mind to produce something. And that's what I'm thinking about a lot. When this whole coronavirus ends, are we going to be able to say that I produced something? What did I get out of this many weeks in quarantine? What have I to show? Well, let me tell you another story of Reb Chaim Marzulai, who was a famous Sephardic rabbi who was born in Hebron in the 1700s. He was an exceptionally great scholar, speaker, a leader, and even at the age of 29, he was asked by the community to embark on a years-long speaking and fundraising tour of the Jewish world at the time. And primarily he would travel to the major Jewish communities of Europe to raise money for the poor people back in Israel. Back in those days, that's how it was done. The poorer community of the Jewish world, primarily of Jerusalem and other cities in the Holy Land, they would send these messengers and representatives to visit their Jewish brethren and regale with them with tales of Jewish life in the cities and the countries. And these representatives were typically wonderful orators, and they could paint a beautiful image with their words. Wherever they went, they could bring the love of the Holy Land to the people. And they would visit local synagogues and tell the stories about Jerusalem, the Kotel, the cobbled streets of the old city, or about Hebron and the city of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And the people would sit there and hear and with the vivid stories of their beloved homeland and hear about their life. And of course, it was to help raise funds for him to bring it back to the Holy Land. And so these representatives would go from city to city, connecting, making these bonds and raising funds. So I'm telling you about Rabbi Ozalai, who traveled all over Europe for 5 years. And in addition to doing his mission, he loved visiting Jewish libraries in each city that he went in. Now, he was blessed with a phenomenal memory, and he would pursue all the different ancient books found in these various countries. Many years later, he was asked to do this again, to go traveling around to raise money. And so in the year 1770, this great rabbi, Reb Chaim Ozalai, visited the wealthy Jewish community of Livorno, which is in Italy. Now, at that time, Livorno had a law in effect that required any visitor from any foreign country or any imported goods from any foreign country, they had to go into quarantine immediately upon arrival, because Livorno was a port city. And not just a few days, but my friend, it was a full 40 days. Can you imagine? 40 days. There was apparently some disease going on around at that time. So when Rabbi Ozalai, this rabbi, shows up that year after Passover, the people say to him, "We'd love to have you, but you have to be quarantined." And being an affluent as they were, they put him up in his own guest house for 40 days. So what did Rabbi Ozalai do for 40 days under house arrest? Basically, well, he wasn't just a writer, but he was a genius. And he took to writing a new book during that time. In general, you should know that he wrote 70 books in his lifetime. And he wrote a book on the history of Jewry up to that point in history. And that particular book was basically an encyclopedia on every major rabbi who had lived before him, close to 1,500. In fact, and he wrote all of this from memory, without such modern aids as Google or all the other, research tools that we have today. Later, he spent time checking his facts and getting his book ready for print. So guess what, my friends? For 40 days, this rabbi who was in quarantine was not lost. In fact, they were very productive, and he used his time very, very well. And that's my question. And I keep on saying to myself, what's going to be when this is all over? Will I be able to look back and say, did I accomplish something during this time? Or did I just basically veggie out? As a matter of fact, speaking of the word quarantine, does anybody know where it comes from? Well, it turns out that the word quarantine comes from the Italian word quarantena, which means 40 days. It refers exactly to this situation where it was ships docking in the Italian ports, and they were not allowed to bring their men or the goods ashore before 40 days had passed. So now, does anyone know where in Judaism we find the concept of staying in one place for 40 days? Yeah, you're right, my friends. The holiday's coming up this week, Friday and Shabbos. Best kept secret, the holiday of Shavuos, when Moses went up on the mountain, and after 40 days came down. He was up there for 40 days. He was basically quarantined. So Moshe went up on the mountain, staying for 40 days. And in fact, you know that he stayed up there 3 times. So basically, he was quarantined for 40 days, 3 times, for 120 days. What was he doing up there? He wasn't wearing a mask. And he wasn't, filling his head with all kinds of news from this one and that one and becoming so, confused about what was going on. Talmud tells us God was teaching him the entire Torah. And the Talmud tells us something very interesting. The Talmud says that Moshe knew when it was day and when it was night. Because God taught him the Bible, that means the 5 books of Torah, all the Torah, by day, and Talmud by night. You understand, Moshe was in a cloud. He was in quarantine. It was like being inside the eruption of a volcano. You can't Gurnish and Zen. You can't see Gurnish. You couldn't even tell otherwise if it was day or night. So why was it that God taught him the Torah by day and the Talmud by night? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains something very interesting. The Rebbe points out that Torah itself is clear. It is simple, straightforward text. The Talmud, on the other hand, is complex. It is filled with questions and answers, and you have to figure it out. So the Torah is or, light, and therefore associated with day. And Talmud, which is darkness, is associated with night. So he knew when it was day, when he was being taught Torah. He knew it was night when Hashem taught him the Talmud. But that's what he was doing during quarantine. He wasn't wasting his time. The same thing was with the Rabbi Azulai that I'm telling you. He too was quarantined for 40 days. But he considered it one of the most productive times of his life. Why am I telling you this? Because a quarantine doesn't have to be unproductive. It all depends on what you do, on what we've been doing during these couple of months. This, of course, brings us to the counting of the Omer, which is nearing the end, right? We're into the 44th day, 45th day, nearly concluding the whole 49 count. Now, what's behind the counting of the Omer? Which is essentially nothing more than just counting days. Why do we have to count the days between Passover and Shavuos? We already know that there's 50 days between Pesach and Shavuos. So every year we make a bracha, every day we count the days. And the Rebbe said many times, the count of the Omer is there to remind us that time is precious. After all, you count what is precious to you. I mean, when you take your kids to the zoo, we're always checking and counting them, right? We take our kids and they're running around. Every minute, you're looking around, counting, make sure you have all the kids. Every 15 minutes, we're counting our kids. If something's important to you, count them. It's kind of like how some people check their stocks on the market every 5 minutes. The point is that counting means that something is precious to you. Because at the end of the day, time is the only thing you cannot get back. If you lose a shtuckel geld, you can always earn new money back. But time, a day back, no. You can't just get back old time. And that's a very, very important part for us to appreciate during this pandemic season. And that brings us to the Torah portion that we read yesterday. The week's parsha is called Bamidbar. It's also the start of a new book of the Torah, the 4th of the 5 books of Moses. This one is also called Bamidbar. The Torah portion is called Bamidbar, and the whole book is called Bamidbar. Now the word Bamidbar in Hebrew means desert. But in English, the book is also called Numbers. Why is it called Numbers? Because in the Torah portion, which opens up the book, tells us how Hashem told Moses to count us all. Throughout the entire Torah, in fact, there are 3 places where God tells Moses to count us, to hold the census. By the way, has everybody sent in their census? Right? They're getting nervous over there. But the first question is, why 3 times? Isn't once enough? The question is even bigger. Why would God need to count us anyway? Doesn't he know how many we are? Does God really need to know a precise number? So to answer that question, Rashi says something very interesting. The concept behind this census is to demonstrate God's love for each and every one of us and how precious we are to him. Because anything that is precious to you, you count again and again. So Rashi says that the counting was to show us that he loves us. I just want to tell you a story that just happened. It's amazing. In Israel, just a short 7 years ago, in Jerusalem, there's a neighborhood called Telstone. There was a family that lost an entire box filled with jewelry. It just disappeared. So they filed an insurance claim, and they got reimbursed for the thousands of shekels, which was equivalent to like $15,000 in United States dollars. Well, along comes the coronavirus in the quarantine, and the family in Telstone find themselves stuck at home with not much to do. So they took to organizing their house. Hey, lo and behold, what do you think? They found a long-lost box of jewelry. Yeah? Can you imagine? They found the jewelry. What do you think they did? They called the insurance company and informed them. And then proceeded to send back $15,000. They didn't know my address, I guess. Well, the insurance company was only too happy to get their money back. They actually wrote to the family a nice letter stating that this was the first time in their history that a customer had given them their money back. So, my friends, the concept here is that the time being spent at home is being lost is just not true. In fact, this year, with Hashem's help, could ultimately be the best ever yet. Think about it, all the researchers and the scientists stuck at home, even without their labs and the equipment, I'll bet you that they'll discover more medications and more vaccines and more important things as a result. And even more than that, even more that they would do even if they'd been normal. In other words, if a person's staying at home and using his brains and thinking positive things, I must tell you, dear friends, so many people are sitting at home that I know, and they're stewing in this negativity. This is going to be, and this is going to be. And they've got it all worked out, that if they breathe from this side of the nose, in this side of the street, and there's this and that, and they got it all worked out, and they walk away with anxiety like you can't imagine. But if a person sits back, tries to keep a schedule, eat at the right time, dress properly, do some learning, do some research, go online, write something, keep a diary, man alive, this is not going to be a lost year. I go so far to say that we will not only look back and say it was not a lost year, but on the contrary, it was a year that ultimately produced a lot of good for a lot of people. True, we feel for those, and we must feel for those who have lost their jobs, and even more so for those who have lost loved ones. But this year is not lost. What we do in our homes, in our rooms, is up to us. You know, there's a story told of two Chabad Hasidim of recent times, Rabbi Mendel Futterfass and Rabbi Moshe Vyshetsky. Rabbi Futterfass was sentenced to many years in Siberia for the crime of helping smuggle Jews out of Russia. But Mendel, as he was known, was a very smart man, a clever man, a very happy man. Even in the Gulag, he not only befriended the guards, but they all came to respect and love him too. And they became his friends. So one day one of the guards says to him, hey, one of your fellow Hasidim have just been brought here yesterday. In fact, he's being held in the cell downstairs directly under your cell. Well, as it turned out, that new prisoner was none other than Moshe Vyshetsky. Reb Mendel was informed that if he put his mouth on or near the pipe that ran from his cell through the floor down to Reb Moshe's cell below, they could actually communicate with each other. Well, here I am to tell you, many years later, Reb Moshe would tell the story of Reb Mendel's first question to him after he made his first contact with him through the pipe. What do you think his first words to him was? Moshe, Moshe, are you happy? Moshe would testify that it was that very question that saved him. What Moshe was essentially telling him was, don't be impressed. Don't let the prison affect you. They want to break your spirit. If you lose it, they win the fight. Only if you hold on to will, hold on to it. And will with the proper will, you're going to survive. So, my friends, the most important things that we need in these times is attitude. A good attitude. Right? You remember in school when the teacher said to you, you got an attitude? Well, now's the time to use your attitude. A good one. A positive one. Mendel's question calls on us too and says, are you happy? In other words, forget about the fact that we're in Siberia, so to speak. We're above that. So no matter what the situation, let us not be affected by it. Let's make the most of it. Even during this quarantine of 2020, and Baruch Hashem, we seem to be slowly coming out of it, we can still all make this time count. That's my point. That's what I wanted to share with you. But there's one other thing that has been on my mind. If I was to show you, dear friends, the emails I received, the negative emails I received about this one not being careful, this one's not wearing a mask, this group of people are gathering, and this and that, there's a big, huge funeral went on with everybody. You know what I'm talking about. And that's been bothering me as well. You see, I would like to say that one of the things that I've learned from being in quarantine, and I think hopefully we'll come out of this, with this in our pocket, so to speak, is that stop judging how others are responding to the pandemic. Everyone seems very judgmental these days. We're all very conflicted about how to behave during this pandemic and the constant barrage of information. This one tells you this one tells you that. The governor says azoy, the president says azoy. Back and forth, you're going to be shiga. So we've got plenty of information and misinformation. It does not make it easy for us. But it seems so unfortunate that during a situation where unity seems so crucial and beneficial, we've retreated to our corners and decided our position, whether it lies on the wherever it lies on the spectrum, is the only correct one. I'm telling you, my friends, I've been receiving emails from one particular place, and I will tell you, throughout the only email that came from this particular person was a negative. What do you think about this one doing this, and what do you think about that one? I can't believe it. I did not respond once to this person, but it reminded me how careful we must be not to be judgmental. If someone can only send you an email constantly of negativity, you start to wonder. But I can understand those who feel differently, who are having a hard time feeding their family or maintaining their sense of self-respect or even their sanity. But I think we should all begin with a little more compassion. It also makes me sad. We should be coming together during this time, not splitting apart. Our disagreements can be managed with respect and understanding. Yes, some behaviors increase the risk for others, but I can stay isolated to avoid that. It's unfortunate that the opportunity to truly come together to fight an external enemy isn't uniting us sufficiently. But as individuals, we can make our own small differences. And it begins with not judging, with letting go of that self-righteousness, with seeing others as just as thoughtful and well-meaning as we, and with really trying to understand. My friend, that's what I'm only saying. I wrote a little piece that you may have seen on Facebook of, it did take communities where going to synagogue 3 times a day, and there's a higher density of people, a much harder time to get into that mode of not going to shul or not coming together. If a person chooses to go to shul once a year or 3 times a year, not going to shul now is not such a big deal, right? Let's be honest. But if you're going to shul 3 times a day, and you learn in the shul, and you celebrate brises, and you have weddings, and you have communities that are growing, and the blessings that come from that, it took a little longer. I'm not saying anything in defense of things, not doing things the right way that we're told, but have some Rahmanis. Don't be judgmental right away. Understand. There are many issues that came up during this time that are unbelievable. And I'm sure people are writing books already. There'll be movies. There'll be who knows what that will trace individual stories or groups of how they dealt with. And I think we shouldn't be so quick to judge anybody else. And look at ourselves and say, what am I accomplishing? Did I do everything I should have been doing in these pandemic seasons, so to speak? Do I have something to show? What am I going to be able to show my children and grandchildren? What I accomplished? That I eat a refrigerator of food? Come on, let's be honest. This is a very, very important time. Ultimately, we'll find out the bigger picture of why all this thing happened. But right now, my friends, I'm on this campaign to say to myself, and I'm sharing it with you, if you wish to listen, as we come out of this pandemic period in quarantine, and may Hashem bless us with continued good health to every single one of us, and those who are still in hospitals to come out very quickly, completely in health. Let's make sure we have something to show. It could be a diary of the main things you accomplished, the conversations perhaps you had, how you reached out to somebody who was alone. You heard about someone's birthday. We were very honored that in our community in Mineola, the first time we were having our Shabbos meal, suddenly we hear a whole line of cars. The neighbor across the street, a little girl, 6 years old, and they had this drive-by birthday party, right? We've seen all these stories online, in the papers, but I saw ourselves. It was such a nice feeling. People came together for this family, and the family stood outside with their masks on, and they had balloons, and it was a six-year-old birthday party, but it was very beautiful. It was very beautiful to see. Helping make a little child happy. Can we look back and say, did we make anybody happy during this time? Or are we sitting around sulking and kvetching and complaining, and this thing didn't happen and that thing didn't happen? My friends, the great great King David, he was stuck in a cave. He was able to write. He had the sense of mind to be able to write one of the famous Psalms, 142, written in a cave. This great Rabbi Ozilai was stuck in for 40 days in this quarantine. He wrote one of his best books. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, went up on the mountain. He was quarantined, so to speak, for 40 days. He came back. He presented us the tablets, came back with the knowledge of Torah and the Talmud. I'm saying to myself, I hope I could be able to come out of this too, showing to myself, to my family, to my community, that something good has happened. It wasn't just sitting at home, sulking, and feeling bad, and being judgmental about anybody else. This is your host, Rabbi Perl. Wishing you a good week. Don't forget it, Shavuos coming week. Chag Sameach. Don't forget, have plenty of cheesecake. Sei gesund.